So, the woman with the issue of blood. Now, we've all heard the story many, many times. Unless you haven't been in church all your life or you haven't been a Christian for very long, you've heard the story. And I've heard a lot of sermons about it and speaking to the determination of this woman. But I want to ask you today, do you know why she knew that Jesus would heal her? Because she was very sure. She felt so sure. She said, if I just touch the hem of his garment, I know I'm going to be healed. And so I want to ask you a question today, but I'm going to answer it a little bit later on in the video. Why did she know that Jesus would heal her? And it's such an important question, and the answer is just as important. And so we're going to get into that in a minute. But if you've been following this channel for a while and you haven't subscribed, I'd like to ask if you wouldn't mind doing that, because it really does help the channel. And if you like the video at any point, just press the like button, because again, it helps these videos get out to other people and to more people. So if you can do that, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you so much. So the first thing I want to look at before we go into the why is how this woman's life would have been going. And I'm not going to read all of this, but if you go into the book of Leviticus and you go to chapter 15 and you read through verse 25 to 29, you get a pretty good idea, and you can read the whole chapter if you're into it, but you can get a pretty good idea of what her life would have been like, because it speaks to the laws and customs of the time, and it basically shows you that her, as a woman who was bleeding outside of that normal time that women do, it basically speaks to it. It says that if a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, other than at her customary time, and then it speaks about how she's unclean, and it says in verse 26, every bed that she lies on, that bed is unclean. Anyone touches that bed is unclean, and anything that she's touched is unclean, and anyone touches anything she's touched is unclean. And this was a big deal to them. And so there's a pretty good chance that you're looking at a woman who's not only been unwell, and we're not really sure from what, for 12 years she's had this problem, and she's in this situation, and according to the Levitical law, anything she touched, if someone else touched it, not only was she unclean, her bed was unclean, her chair was unclean, her table was unclean, her bowl and her spoon was unclean, everything she touched was unclean, and anyone who touched the stuff that she had touched was also unclean. There's a pretty good chance you're looking at a woman who hadn't had anyone that was affectionate to her in 12 years. That, you know, who's going to want to hug someone if it's going to make me unclean? And then I've got to go back and look at all these Levitical laws and follow all these rituals so that I'm not unclean because I hugged you, or I touched your spoon, or I touched your plate, or I tried to tidy up your bed. This is a woman who would have lived largely in isolation and had to do everything for herself, because if not, everything she touched and they become unclean. And this is a major problem for them, because now they've got to follow all kinds of other things to make themselves clean again. It's just the way it was in those days. So I thought about this when I thought, you know, it's such a terrible thing that she must have been going through. It must, even in her own home, and we don't know who she lived with, but it must have been so isolating, because, you know, maybe somebody did help her now and again. We don't know, but the chances are that the majority of time, I think it probably wouldn't have happened the majority of time, if not at all, that people would have touched what she touched, or hugged her, or been affectionate with her. And, you know, I remember when I was single many years ago, going through like a week of not seeing anybody. Our offices were closed, people were away, and not seeing a single person, and feeling so isolated and so alone and feeling so lonely. And then you think about somebody like her, that even if there were people in her life, she would have felt so isolated and so alone because of that status of being unclean all the time. And the mental and emotional impact this must have had, not just the physical, but all those other things, the impact it must have had on her over 12 years. And I don't think we can understand unless we've been in a situation where we've been struggling with the same illness for 12 years. But not only that, this illness makes you an outcast in your society. You know, nobody wants to go near you. Nobody in your community wants to touch you. Nobody wants anything to do with you because of the status of you being unclean. And it's just the way that it would have been in those days. So such an isolating, terrible way to live. And then we see if you look, you can find the story in three different Gospels. The first one is in Matthew 9, verse 20 to 22, and then Mark 5, 25 to 34, and Luke 8, 43 to 48. But my personal favorite is the one in Mark. And so I'm going to go and look at that one now. And so that's Mark 5, 25 to 34. And it says, now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. So not only was she suffering with this illness, but it said she suffered many things from many physicians. So the doctors had also made her suffer for whatever they had done, had made her suffer even more. She had spent all that she had. So she spent every bit of money she had. She obviously had money. She obviously didn't start out poor or anything, or she wouldn't have had money to go to all these doctors. But she'd been to many doctors, which meant she had spent a lot of money. And so here's a woman who had money, had spent all of it on doctors in 12 years, and not a single one of them could help her. And in fact, all they did was make her suffer more. And she had spent all that she had and was no better, but she rather grew worse. So everything she tried had failed, but she was just getting worse. It was not improving. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if I only may touch his clothes, I shall be made well. And there's other versions where it says, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, if I could just touch the fringe of his garment, I know I'll be made well. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed out of that affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? But his disciples said to him, you see the multitude thronging you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see her who had done this thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. She told him everything. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. And so, I've heard a lot of people speak incredible words about the story. There's so many things we can learn. And I always love I've heard it from multiple pastors saying how that she became a somebody when she touched Jesus. And it's so true because, we can be in a space in our life where we feel like we're not worth anything. And I'm sure she probably felt that way because of being so isolated and not being well, not being healed. And she touched Jesus. Not only was she instantly healed, but he said, somebody touched me. And he recognized the power that had gone out of him and that she'd been healed. And then I want to read to you as well, and this is interesting. In Matthew chapter 14, verse 35, 36, it says, and when the men of that place recognized him being Jesus, they sent out into all that surrounding region, brought him to all who were sick, and begged him that they may only touch the hem of his garment. And as many as touched it were made perfectly well. And so you see her touching the hem of his garment, and then you see all these men coming and saying, if we can just touch the hem of his garment, we're going to be healed. And I began to look into that, and I learned something so interesting, that if you go back into the book of Malachi, and this is where we get a bit of history and a little bit of context, which I think really helps to understand the story in the Bible a lot better. So if you go into the book of Malachi, in chapter 4, verse 2, it says, there's a prophecy here about the Messiah, obviously long before he came. And it says in verse 2, so chapter 4, verse 2 of Malachi, but to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. And this was commonly understood at the time to be a prophecy about the coming Messiah, and it speaks about him having healing in his wings. And this is the connection point here, because if you go into the history and all that kind of thing, and you can research for yourself if you want to, I don't have time to explain all the nitty-gritty details, but the bottom line is this, that the fringe of their garments, because he was a rabbi, so the fringe of a rabbi's garment was very often referred to as the wings. So this prophecy, as a well-known word about the coming Messiah, spoke of him having healing in his wings, or healing in the fringe or the hem of his garment. And so to answer the question that I asked right at the beginning of this video, how did she know that he would heal her? And how did those men say, just let us touch the hem of his garment? Do you want to know why? Because they knew the word. They knew the prophecy about the coming Messiah. And so did she. Because why on earth would she ever think about touching the hem of his garment? We get used to hearing it because it's like hearing something from the Bible many times. It feels familiar and it doesn't feel unusual to you. And so she knew this prophecy. She would have known it. Why else would she say that? Why else would she think, if I just touch the hem of his garment? Because the Bible actually prophesied at the end of the Old Testament that he would have healing in the fringe of his garment. And so that tells you two things. Number one, she knew the word. And number two, she believed that Jesus was the Messiah and the Son of God. And so that is why she got healed. That is how she knew she'd be healed. Because not only did she know that word, but she knew that he was the Son of God. She wouldn't have had the audacity to even do that if she hadn't believed that he was the Son of God. But they knew that the Messiah would come with healing in the fringe of his rabbi's garment. And so when she went up, it wasn't because of her own determination. Yes, there must have been an amount of determination to push through that crowd, but what gave her that determination? She got that determination because she knew what the word said about the Messiah, and she believed in her heart that Jesus was that Messiah. And so it's not just a case of, oh, yay, she got healed because no, there was specific reasons behind it. And it makes the story so much richer when we understand that she knew he was God. She said, this is God. This is the Messiah. This is the one sent from heaven. And I know he's going to heal me because the word says so. And it's so important for you and me to know the word and to know the author of the word. When we know that Jesus is the Son of God, and we know God our Father, and when we know him and we have a relationship with him and we know his word, then we can have full faith and determination to believe God for any of the promises that he has promised in his word that we can have. And so I hope that helped somebody today to just understand the story a little bit better. If you like the video, again, please press the like button. If you didn't like the video, you can press the dislike button. I don't mind which one you press. It makes no difference to me. Press one of them. So that's it for today. And I genuinely hope that this just gave you a little bit more insight into the story. When I saw that, I loved it. And it made the whole thing come alive for me. So that's it for today. And I will see you next time.